Former Indiana Congressman Stephen Buyer was among 9 people arrested for insider trading. This was revealed on Monday with the unsealing of indictments in New York City. The news comes on heels of news that Paul Pelosi, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's husband, of course, made some questionable trades of his own, prompting a bipartisan call from Congress to ban stock trading altogether.
Here to discuss more on this, a reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester, and White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegmann. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good morning.
So Julia, help us understand the nature of this inside information and how it came to be disseminated allegedly to these 9 people.
Right. So I think what happened was initially this former Congressman Stephen Buyer was supposedly playing golf, and he was relayed information by a T-Mobile executive, and then he made a move in terms of how he insider traded. And I think you are really seeing this issue. It's gotten a lot of traction among Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and it's actually split sort of both parties as to where to go from here on this. You have some lawmakers who are very much in favor of banning insider trading and others who are not as in favor. But I think it shows you, sort of how this issue is bipartisan, not only bipartisan, but also I think it essentially it's a way to separate lawmakers, the political elite, the business elite from everyday Americans, giving them an advantage. And many find that unethical.
Yeah, Philip, what's the Republican temperature on this? Because Nancy Pelosi is a little bit associated with the purchasing of stocks right now because of her husband, and also because she kind of notably came out in favor of allowing members of Congress to trade stocks. So she's kind of stuck to that. So Republicans could, use that to have a kind of glorifying moment if they really came out against it. But then, of course, there have been a number of Republicans who have been caught in kind of insider trading scandals. So what's the mood on the right?
Well, let's take a moment and back up here, because I don't think a lot of us were paying particularly close attention to this former congressman from Indiana's 5th district. He's generally unremarkable, a politician whose time came and went during the Bush administration. And that is exactly the problem. That's precisely the problem. Because he's much less prominent than someone who is in leadership. Instead, this is an individual who served on the subcommittee that literally regulated telecommunications. He served on the committee for about a decade. And then what does he do when he gets out of Congress? He immediately goes to K Street and works as a lobbyist. Through that milieu, through that sort of revolving door, he allegedly picks up a good hot insider tip over a golf game. And now he's getting run up on these charges. We're talking about a relatively small amount of money, a portfolio that is small potatoes in comparison to some of these other options trades that we are seeing. He's being accused of profiting, I think, $350,000 from what we learned in that AP report. The question is, if this guy is just sort of a backbench member of Congress who, after he left the Hill, had enough of a heads-up sense on where to make some cash lobbying, what is someone who is going to be incredibly plugged in? What is someone who perhaps could have control over the House calendar? How much more valuable is the information they are going to have access to? And that's why I think this case, none of us necessarily were waiting for bated breath to figure out what was happening to this former congressman from Indiana, but it's potentially a test case. It is potentially a shot across the bow for some of these other members of Congress.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. When I was a corporate attorney, I was frankly blown away as a young lawyer about how common these kinds of things are, and the fact that these 9 people got caught is really just a reflection of that, how this is like a small potatoes incident of a much broader phenomenon. At least one of the other 9 people named in the indictment was the boyfriend of a young woman who worked on the deal, who apparently looked through her laptop unbeknownst to her and got the stock tips. And this is something that we're warned about, right, as an attorney, to keep your things private, not to share even passing information with the people you're dating or your family members or around, because this kind of thing is so common, but also can be kind of difficult to track down if the person has a more regular history of trading these kinds of stocks. It's more the anomalous spikes that stand out. I want to come back to you, Julia. You know, is there going to be appetite given the fact that this kind of thing, stock trading at all outside of your kind of retirement portfolios, is kind of anathema to the average American? Do you think there is going to be the kind of political appetite to start paying more attention to this in the ways that our elected officials in particular have privy to information that they're exploiting, you know, in order to get an edge over the ordinary American public?
I think you're going to start to see that appetite, and we really started to see it last year when you heard those talks about a potential insider trading ban on members of Congress, including their spouses. And the fact that, you know, unlike the congressman from Indiana who Philip was talking about, you know, he's relatively unknown, former congressman. We don't know much about him. Most Americans probably don't care. However, when you have someone like Paul Pelosi, the Speaker of the House's husband, that becomes an entirely different situation because she is in leadership. They do have that influence and that power. And I think when you see those more high-ranking members or their spouses getting tied into this issue of insider trading, that's when you start to hear more about it. You know, I remember right before the pandemic, I believe, Richard Burr, a senator from North Carolina, Kelly Loeffler, then senator from Georgia, they were insider trading, and there was a bit of a much ado about that. So, you know, I think the more high-ranking officials you see tied up in this, the more of an appetite there will be, and more coverage, quite frankly, of it.
Right, and I remember that conservative media was pretty hard on, justifiably so, on Burr and Loeffler. Tucker grilled one or the other on his show, which showed that, to the extent that conservative media is listening and very in tune, in a lot of cases, with what the base wants, that would demonstrate that the conservative base does have hostility to this kind of thing going on. You know, Phil, does that mean this is something that Republican politicians would be well advised to be talking about, banning, you know, members of Congress from trading stocks?
Certainly, I think that there's a hope that good government would be good politically. I'm not certain if this is something that we're going to see members of Congress run on, other than sort of some talking points. But this is definitely something that they should take seriously. And I think there's an appetite for a politician who does more than just sort of mouth drain the swamp, but actually could back some of this up. Julia nailed it a second ago. Because I think that there is already an impression that Congress is full of crooks. And there's already this impression that, oh, well, some businessman went to Congress and then after, you know, a couple terms, he left as a millionaire. That negative perception is incredibly damaging to the institution. And I think that it does take some of these more prominent cases. Perhaps it takes a spotlight on an individual like Paul Pelosi for people to step back and say, all right, well, the usual graft that we could sort of let go at the edges, that's no longer acceptable. I think that at some point it's going to take a pretty high-profile scalp for things to change. Right now, though, I mean, you've got a lot of platitudes. You've got a lot of people who, you know, like to say things like drain the swamp, you know, go after waste, fraud, and abuse. But it's very much kind of a talking point. And so I think that there's going to have to be some real teeth put behind this. You're going to have to see someone who does tap into, I think, the very real sense of unfairness that comes with some of these unfair advantages in Congress, but do so in a way which isn't just, oh yeah, like drain the swamp and, you know, blind trust. You're gonna need someone who's actually going to have to crusade on this issue, and maybe it does mean nailing someone high profile to the wall.
Well, Julia and Philip, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising in just a minute.